The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle and I felt my stomach do a little flip. This was it, my fresh start in Paris, 6,000 miles from my cheating ex. "Passport, please," the customs officer said in accented English. I handed it over, trying not to look as nervous as I felt. "I'm here to start a new job," I explained. He barely glanced up. "Duration of stay?" Indefinitely. "I have a work visa." He stamped my passport and waved me through. Just like that, I was officially in Paris. Outside, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of cigarettes. I hailed a taxi and gave the driver my new address in broken French. Le Quartier Latin," he exclaimed. "Très bonne chose, mademoiselle." I nodded, pretending I understood more than 3 words of what he'd said. As we drove into the city, I pressed my forehead against the window, taking in the unfamiliar sights. The Eiffel Tower loomed in the distance. "Fuck you, Chance," I whispered. "I'm gonna own this city." The first few weeks flew by in a blur of unpacking, awkward French conversations, and getting lost on the metro. But slowly, I started to find my rhythm. One Wednesday morning, I decided to treat myself. I hopped on my new bike, a sweet vintage Tamboid I'd scored at a flea market, and pedaled to a cafe I'd been eyeing. The bell jingled as I pushed open the door of Debut Coffee. The aroma of fresh pastries hit me like a warm hug. "Bonjour," the barista called out. Her name tag read Amira. "Bonjour," I replied, silently congratulating myself for not completely butchering the pronunciation. "Can I get a cappuccino and, that?" I pointed at a lemon tart in the display case. Mira smiled. "Bien sûr. Take a seat, I'll bring it to you." I settled at a table by the window, pulled out my book, and felt myself truly relaxed for the first time since landing in Paris. As I sipped my coffee and people watched, I thought I could get used to this. Little did I know, this tiny cafe was about to become my Wednesday ritual and change my life in ways I never expected. Fast forward a few months and Debut Coffee had become my Wednesday sanctuary. I was there nose deep in Angie Thomas's On the Come Up when the bell chimed. I glanced up more out of habit than interest and nearly choked on my cappuccino. 3 guys in crisp suits walked in looking like they'd stepped out of a fashion mag. But it was the one in the middle that caught my eye, tall with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes so blue they put the Paris sky to shame. Our gazes locked for a split second, and I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the caffeine. "Get it together," I muttered, forcing my attention back to my book, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to Mr. Blue Eyes, who was now deep in conversation with his colleagues at the next table. I was about to leave when I caught him looking at me again. This time, he smiled. "Shit," I thought, my heart racing. "What now?" I hadn't felt this spark with anyone since. Well, since Chance, and look how that turned out. But as Blue Eyes stood up and started walking towards me, I realized I was about to find out if I was ready to take another leap. "Is this seat taken?" Blue Eyes asked, his voice deep with a hint of an accent I couldn't place. No," I managed, gesturing to the empty chair. "Go ahead." He sat down, flashing a smile that made my stomach do somersaults. "I'm Adrian," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, trying to ignore the spark I felt at his touch. "Dalton," I replied, then immediately regretted giving my real name. Old habits die hard, I guess. "Do you come here often?" Adrian asked, then winced. God, that sounded like a terrible pickup line, didn't it? I couldn't help but laugh, "Only if you're trying to pick me up." He grinned, a slight blush creeping up his neck. And if I was... My heart raced. This was moving fast. Too fast? I thought of Chance, of all the promises and lies, but Adrian's eyes were warm, genuine. "Then I'd say you need better material," I teased, surprising myself. Adrian laughed, throwing his head back. "Fair enough. How about this? I'm new in town, and you look like someone who knows their way around a good book and a great cafe. Any chance you'd be willing to show me the ropes?" I hesitated. This was exactly the kind of situation I'd come to Paris to avoid. But something about Adrian made me want to take a risk. "Okay," I heard myself say, "but let's start with coffee and see where it goes." As Adrian's face lit up, I realized I might be in trouble. But for the first time in months, it felt like the good kind. Coffee with Adrian turned into hours of conversation. Before I knew it, Mira was flipping the open sign to closed. "Shit, I didn't realize it was so late," I said, gathering my things. Adrian checked his watch, looking equally surprised. "Time flies, huh? Listen, I know this is forward, but would you want to meet here again next Wednesday?" I bit my lip, considering. Our chat had been easy, fun, but was I ready for this? "Come on," he coaxed, seeing my hesitation. "I promise I'll have better pickup lines by then." I laughed despite myself. All right, next Wednesday it is." And just like that, our debut coffee dates became a weekly thing. We'd meet, swap stories, and slowly I found myself opening up. Wait, you've never seen a Studio Ghibli film? I gasped one day, nearly spilling my latte. Adrian shrugged. Never had the chance. Why are they good? Good, I fumbled for words, okay? That's it. Next week, my place. We're having a Ghibli marathon. He grinned. It's a date. The word hung between us, loaded with possibility. But for once, I didn't feel the urge to run. Instead, I smiled back. Yeah, I said softly, I guess it is. As I biked home that evening, I realized something was different. For the first time since landing in Paris, I was looking forward to something, or someone, other than my weekly escape to debut. The Ghibli Marathon turned into weekend adventures across Paris. One sunny Saturday, we found ourselves at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. I can't believe you've been here for months and haven't done this yet. I teased Adrian as we joined the queue. He shrugged, grinning. Guess I was waiting for the right tour guide. The elevator ride-up was cramped, and I found myself pressed against Adrian's chest. His cologne mixed with the scent of fresh croissants we'd grabbed earlier. It was distracting. You okay? He murmured, his breath tickling my ear. Yeah, I managed, my voice a bit squeaky, just not great with heights. His arm slipped around my waist, steadying me. I've got you. The view from the top was breathtaking, but I couldn't stop sneaking glances at Adrian. The way the wind tousled his hair, the childlike wonder in his eyes as he took in the city, spread out below us. It's beautiful, he said softly. Yeah, I replied, not looking at the view. It really is. Later, as we strolled along the side, our hands brushed, once, twice. On the third time, Adrian's fingers intertwined with mine. I tensed for a moment, old fears bubbling up. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but warmth and patience in those blue eyes. Slowly, I relaxed my hand into his. This okay? He asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As we walked hand in hand under the Paris sky, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let someone in again. Our Paris explorations continued, and with each outing I felt myself opening up more. One evening, as we shared a bottle of wine at a cozy bistro near Montmartre, Adrian asked about my family. I hesitated, swirling the red liquid in my glass. It's complicated. He reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Hey, no pressure, but I'm here if you want to talk. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he genuinely cared. Whatever it was, I found myself spilling everything. My family, they're kind of a big deal back in California, I started. My dad's this hotshot real estate tycoon, mom's a socialite. I've got two older siblings, Diana's in London, and Dylan's taking over the family business. Adrian's eyes widened. Wow, so you're like, rich? I snorted. Yeah, I guess. But it's not all it's cracked up to be, trust me. So why Paris, he asked softly. Why leave all that behind? I took a deep breath. I needed space to figure out who I am without all that baggage, you know? He nodded, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I get it. Must have been hard, though. It was, I admitted. Still is sometimes. But then I remember why I'm here, and I trailed off looking into his eyes. And, he prompted. I smiled, squeezing his hand, and I know I made the right choice. As we walked back to my apartment, hand in hand under the twinkling Parisian lights, I felt lighter. Like I'd shed a skin I didn't even know I was wearing. Thanks for listening, I murmured as we reached my door. Adrian tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Thanks for trusting me. As he leaned in to kiss me goodnight, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of falling. The next week, we were sprawled on a blanket in Parc Monceau, sharing a baguette and some cheese. I noticed Adrian seemed distracted, his gaze distant. Hey, I nudged him. Where'd you go? He blinked, focusing on me. Sorry, I was just thinking. About, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Remember how I said I came to Paris for work? I nodded, sensing there was more to the story. Well, that's not the whole truth, he admitted. I'm looking for someone. As my heart skipped a beat. Oh. My father, Adrian said quietly. I've never met him. I sat up straighter, giving him my full attention. What'd you mean? He took a deep breath. I grew up with just my mom in Canada. She was amazing, worked 3 jobs to put me through college, but I always wondered about my dad. And he's here, in Paris? Adrian nodded. Mom said he was French. I don't have much to go on, just a name and an old photo. But I had to try, you know. I reached out, taking his hand. That's really brave, Adrian. He smiled sadly. Yeah, well, so far it's been a wild goose chase. Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake coming here. Hey, I said firmly, cupping his face. You didn't. Even if you don't find him, you found. Well, you found me. His eyes softened and he leaned in, pressing his forehead against mine. Yeah, I did. As we kissed, the taste of wine and cheese on our lips, I realized how far we'd both come. Two lost souls, finding each other in the city of light. So, I murmured when we finally pulled apart, tell me everything, I want to help you find him. And as Adrian began to share his story, I knew that whatever happened, we were in this together. Weeks flew by, and Adrian and I fell into a comfortable rhythm. We'd spend our days exploring Paris, nights cuddled up, watching old movies or helping each other with work. But as close as we were getting, I still felt a wall between us, my past. One evening, we were cooking dinner at my place. I was chopping vegetables while Adrian stirred a pot of sauce, humming off key. You know, he said, tasting the sauce, I've told you pretty much everything about me, but I still feel like there's a part of you I don't know. I froze, the knife hovering over a tomato. What do you mean? He turned, leaning against the counter. Come on, Dalton. I know you came to Paris for a fresh start, but from what? What are you running from? I set the knife down, my hands shaking slightly. Adrian, He stepped closer, cupping my face. Hey, it's okay. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready. I want to know all of you. Looking into his earnest blue eyes, I felt something inside me crack. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my Shit, I'm sorry, Adrian panicked, pulling me into a hug. I didn't mean to upset you. I shook my head against his chest. No, it's not you, it's God, it's complicated. He stroked my hair gently. I've got time. Taking a deep breath, I pulled back to look at him. Okay, but can we sit down for this and maybe open another bottle of wine? Adrian nodded, a mix of concern and curiosity in his eyes. As we settled on the couch, glasses in hand, I steeled myself. It was time to let him in completely. It all started with a guy named Chance. I began, my voice shaky. I thought he was the love of my life, but as I started to unravel my past, I realized this was it, the moment that would make or break us. And despite my fear, a part of me felt relief. Finally, I was ready to let go. I was halfway through my story about Chance when there was a knock at the door. Startled, I wiped my tears and went to answer it. Surprise, little sis. There stood Diana, my older sister, grinning widely with a suitcase at her feet. Di, what are you doing here? I stammered, caught off guard. Can a girl visit her baby sister in Paris? She waltzed in, then stopped short when she saw Adrian. Oh, hello there. Adrian stood up, looking a bit sheepish. Hi, I'm Adrian. You must be Diana. Diana's eyes darted between us, a knowing smirk forming. Well, looks like I interrupted something. I felt my cheeks burn. We were just talking. Uh-huh, Diana said, unconvinced. She turned to Adrian. So, has my sister told you about Chance? The room went dead silent. Adrian's brow furrowed in confusion, while I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Please, I whispered. But Diana, ever the blunt one, pressed on. Look, Dalton, you came here for a fresh start, right? But you can't move forward if you're still hiding from your past. I looked at Adrian, saw the mix of hurt and confusion in his eyes. You're right, I said quietly. I owe you both an explanation. As we settled back on the couch, Diana joining us with a glass of wine, I took a deep breath. It was time to lay it all out. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Chance was my high school sweetheart, began again, my voice steadier this time. We were together for 5 years. I thought we'd get married, have kids, the whole 9 yards. And so with my sister's supportive hand on my shoulder and Adrian's patient gaze on me, I finally told the whole story, no holds barred. After Diana left for her hotel, the weight of my revelation hung heavy in the air. Adrian hadn't said much during my confession, just listened intently, his hand never leaving mine. So I said, breaking the silence, that's why I came to Paris. To escape, to heal, to find myself again, I guess. Adrian nodded slowly, processing. Thank you for telling me, he said softly. I know that couldn't have been easy. I let out a shaky breath. Are you? Are we okay? He pulled me close, his warmth enveloping me. Of course we are. Your past doesn't change how I feel about you, Dalton. Relieved tears pricked my eyes. I wanted to tell you sooner. I was scared. Hey, he tilted my chin up, meeting my gaze. You told me when you were ready. That's what matters. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling outside my window. Then Adrian spoke up. You know, I have an idea. How about tomorrow we do something special to celebrate new beginnings? I raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? He grinned, that boyish charm I'd fallen for shining through. Leave it to me. Just be ready at 7, okay? As he left that night, leaving me with a tender kiss and promise of tomorrow, I felt lighter than I had in years. The wall I'd built around my heart was finally crumbling, brick by brick. I spent the next day in a mixture of excitement and nerves. What was Adrian planning? As 7 p.m. approached, I slipped on a simple black dress, applied a touch of makeup, and waited. Right on time, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Adrian, looking dashing in a suit, holding a single red rose. Ready for our new beginning? He asked, offering me his arm. Taking a deep breath, I smiled and took it. Lead the way. As we stepped out into the Parisian night, I realized that for the first time since Chance, I was truly ready to let someone in, and it felt exhilarating. Adrian led me through the winding streets of Paris, the anticipation building with each step. Finally, we turned a corner and I gasped. Close to the Eiffel Tower, I breathed, taking in the sight of the illuminated icon. He grinned, clearly pleased with my reaction. Not just the tower. Look closer. As we approached, I noticed a small table set for two, right at the base of the tower. A waiter stood nearby, champagne at the ready. How did you... I know a guy. Adrian winked. Shall we? We settled into our seats, the tower looming above us like a glittering guardian. As we sipped champagne and nibbled on exquisite hors d'oeuvres, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come. A penny for your thoughts, Adrian asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. I smiled, squeezing his fingers. Just thinking about everything, how different my life is now compared to a year ago. He nodded encouragingly. And how do you feel about that? I paused, really considering the question. Honestly, I feel free, like I can finally breathe again. Adrian's eyes softened. I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Dalton. As the night wore on, we talked about everything and nothing. Our hopes, our fears, our dreams. With each word, each laugh, each tender look, I felt the last of my walls crumbling. Dance with me, Adrian suddenly said, standing and offering his hand. I laughed. There's no music. He pulled me up anyway, drawing me close. We don't need any. As we swayed gently under the twinkling lights of the tower, I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In that moment, I knew. Adrian, I whispered, looking up at him. Yes, I think I'm falling in love with you. His smile could have outshone the Eiffel Tower itself. That's good, he murmured, leaning in, because I'm already there. As our lips met, the world around us faded away. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of falling, because I knew Adrian would be there to catch me. The days following our Eiffel Tower date were a whirlwind of bliss. Adrian and I were inseparable, stealing kisses between coffee sips at debut and spending lazy Sundays tangled in my sheets. One evening, as we cuddled on my balcony watching the sunset, Adrian brought up his father again. I think I've got a lead, he said, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. An old address in Montmartre. I turned to face him, seeing the conflict in his eyes. That's great, isn't it? He shrugged. I don't know, what if he doesn't want to meet me? What if he's not what I built up in my head? I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. Hey, listen, whatever happens, I'm here. We'll face it together, okay? Adrian nodded, leaning into my touch. Will you come with me when I go to find him? Of course, I said without hesitation. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. For the next afternoon, we found ourselves standing in front of a weathered apartment building in Montmartre. Adrian's hand was clammy in mine as he stared at the buzzer. You can do this, I whispered, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. He took a deep breath and pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a crackly voice came through the speaker. Oui? Adrian froze. I nudged him gently. Bonjour, he stammered. J'ai cherché Jean-Luc Dupont. Cest. Simon Pere. There was a long pause. Then the door buzzed open. As we climbed the stairs, I could feel Adrian trembling. When we reached the third floor, a door opened, revealing an older man with Adrian's eyes. Adrian, the man said, his voice thick with emotion. Adrian nodded, unable to speak. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Jean-Luc stepped forward and pulled Adrian into a tight embrace. As I watched them, tears streaming down both their faces, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was what healing looked like. This was what love could do. And I realized, standing there in that dingy hallway, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. Adrian spent most of his time with Jean-Luc, making up for lost years. I gave them space, understanding the importance of this newfound connection. One sunny afternoon, Adrian surprised me at work, his face beaming. Get your stuff, he said excitedly. We're going on a picnic. Before I could protest, he'd whisked me away to the Champ de Mars, right in front of the Eiffel Tower. As we settled on a blanket, I noticed he seemed nervous. What's going on, Adrian? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He took a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about family, about the future. My heart started racing. Oh? Meeting my father, It's made me realize something," he continued, taking my hands in his. "Life's too short for regrets, for missed opportunities." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Dalton," he said softly, "you've helped me find my father, but more importantly, you've helped me find myself. And I never want to lose that." Suddenly, he was on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "I know it's fast," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But when you know, and I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He opened the box, revealing a stunning vintage ring. "Dalton, will you marry me?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Memories of chance of past heartbreaks flashed through my mind. But then I looked at Adrian, really looked at him. I saw the love, the sincerity, the promise of a future filled with joy and adventure. And suddenly the answer was clear. "Yes," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." As Adrian slipped the ring on my finger and pulled me into a kiss, the Eiffel Tower stood witness to our love. Tourists around us cheered, but I barely noticed. In that moment, I knew that coming to Paris wasn't just about escaping my past. It was about finding my future, and that future was Adrian. The weeks following our engagement flew by in a blur of excitement and planning. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony in Paris, blending our two worlds. On the morning of our wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel suite, adjusting my simple white dress. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. To my surprise, it was Diana. "Hey, little sis, you ready for this?" I took a deep breath, nodding. "More than ready." She smiled, handing me a small box. "Mom and Dad sent this. They wish they could be here." Inside was a delicate pearl necklace, a family heirloom. As Diana fastened it around my neck, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. "I never thought I'd be here," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "After chance, I thought." Diana squeezed my shoulders. "But you are here, you're stronger than you know, Dalton." As we made our way to the small chapel near Montmartre, I thought about the journey that led me here, the heartbreak, the leap of faith coming to Paris, the unexpected love I found in a coffee shop. Adrian was waiting for me at the altar, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Jean-Luc stood proudly beside him as his best man. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes locked with Adrian's, and suddenly everything else faded away. "You look beautiful," he whispered as I reached him. "That's so bad yourself," I quipped, my voice thick with emotion. As we exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever life threw our way, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't just the end of my journey to heal. It was the beginning of a new adventure. Later, at our reception on a boat cruising down the Seine, Adrian pulled me close for our first dance. "Happy," he murmured against my hair. I looked up at him, at the man who had helped me believe in love again, and smiled. More than I ever thought possible. As we swayed under the Parisian night sky, the Eiffel Tower twinkling in the distance, I knew that this moment, this love, this life we were building together was exactly where I was meant to be. My great leap to Paris had led me straight into the arms of my future, and I couldn't wait to see where our journey would take us next.